All right, it looks like we are live. So I'll start it off. Welcome everyone to our webinar, Voting in Times of COVID-19. I hope everyone is healthy and safe. It's been a minute since our last webinar back during May, during APIA. Our webinar is presented by the 2020 project, and we've partnered with APIAVote and our friends there. It's co-sponsored by ASAM News, and fortunately, we've been fortunate to have our community partners, Los Angeles, join us. I'm Jess Vu. I'm part of the outreach team for the 2020 project. If you're new to us, we're a collaboration between UNASA and YAMYAMF, and our goal is to get 100,000 AAPIs registered to vote by the 2020 elections, which is coming up really fast. We do this through raising awareness, providing education, and giving a space for civic engagement on the local, regional, and national scale. You can follow us on social media at Vote 2020 Project, or you can look at our website at vote-2020-project.org. It's a little bit of a mouthful. I encourage you all to head over there after the webinar and hopefully pledge and register to vote if you haven't, and also check your registration if you have registered. That's really important. Now I'll like to transition it to our partners at APIAVote, their program associate, Julie Wu, who will introduce their organizations and then transition it to Christine and the panelists. Take it away.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Jess. So just to start things off, I'm going to do a quick, less than 5-minute presentation about voting in the time of COVID-19. So let me share my screen real quick. Awesome. Voting during the time of COVID-19. So a little bit about our organization before I get started. APIAVote, we are a national nonpartisan organization. We work with partners throughout the nation, as well as student organizations, to ensure that the API community is participating in electoral and civic participation. And this year also, because it's a census year, we're doing a lot of get out the count work as well. And if you want to follow us, you can follow us at APIAVote on all these different platforms, TikTok included, if not for long, but feel free to head out and check us out after this presentation if you so wish. So how does COVID-19 affect the upcoming election? I listed out 3 different ways that we can kind of dive a little bit deeper into before we kick off the panel. And the 3 areas I want to talk about are voter registration, in-person voting, and vote by mail. So starting off with voter registration, COVID-19 affects voter registration because many in-person voter registration efforts are thwarted by the global pandemic. So personally, I work with students, I work with student organizations, and our ambassadors have done really cool in-person voter registration events, such as boba and ballots or ramen and registration, all the alliterations. Best way to lure out college students is free food, right? Well, with the global pandemic, there will be no free food and no events because that's not safe. So there goes one great avenue for us to register folks to vote. And so that is a big concern that we have going into this election, that many voter registration efforts are thwarted by COVID-19. And also noting that not all states have online voter registration, so that just adds another layer of a barrier, because not everybody has a printer, right, to print it out or mail it out. Not everyone has access to transportation to the post office. Whatever the case might be, it's just much more difficult to register folks to vote. So definitely, if you're watching this and you're interested in getting involved with voter engagement, feel free to check out our website at APIAVote.org and find out ways to get involved. And the other thing that I listed was for students, especially, they have their student involvement fairs, there's canvassing efforts, everything. So just wanted to bring light to that situation. The second way that COVID-19 affects the elections, I want to talk about in-person voting. So with the pandemic, with all the fluctuations in terms of what states are in their second phase or third phase or going back to first phase, we just don't know what the polls are going to look like. We don't know if in-person polling locations are going to be open. And there's also just concerns in general, health concerns in general. There's going to be long lines, as we've seen for many of the primaries. There's going to be lots of people. The weather's going to be cold. So if the line stretches outside of the polling location, people are going to be standing out in the cold for hours. And I'm sure that does not help with the COVID-19 situation. So in-person voting is very up in the air. We don't know what it's going to look like. And even just because polls are open doesn't mean that it's the safest way to go. And therefore, we're going to talk about vote by mail. So voting by mail is an ideal solution or an ideal approach to voting in the 2020 elections, but some barriers that folks might run into is that when you vote by mail, you need to be mindful of deadlines, right? Because you need to fill out the absentee ballot, or you need to even like request the absentee ballot. And the dates that are usually advertised are the in-person polling dates. So many people just don't know to plan ahead. They just don't really know what it means to vote by mail. So that can be quite a big barrier for our communities. And then some might have concerns about the safety of voting by mail, but we just want to reassure you that voting by mail is very safe. And this has been a way to vote for many, many years. So definitely a tool to utilize to safely vote this year. And just to emphasize vote by mail with all these cool GIFs I found on the internet, just want to reiterate voting by mail as an ideal way to vote during the pandemic. And as a bonus, you get to support USPS. So who doesn't want to do that? Some things to keep in mind when voting by mail. First off, you want to check your voter registration status. This is just like in general, I guess, if you're going to vote in person or by mail. If you've moved, which I know many college students specifically have moved back and forth depending on your situation, you want to make sure that your voter registration address is up to date. So you can head over to APIAVote.org/register, and we have a tool where you could just plug in your name, plug in your information, and check to see if you're registered to vote. And if you're not registered to vote at the correct location, no worries, just re-register with the correct location. And the second thing to keep in mind is that you need to research vote by mail requirements and deadlines in your specific state, because as you can see by this little graphic, the rules change from state to state. It's not like a one size fits all. So you want to make sure that you're up to date with all the dates and all the procedures that you need to know. And I want to end this quick presentation by just plugging, this is data from the National Study of Learning, Voting and Engagement, also known as NSOLV. These are election results based on the 2014 and 2018 midterm elections. If you take a look, the Asian students, voter turnout tripled between 2014 and 2018, and the Native Hawaiian, Asian Pacific Islander student turnout doubled between 2014 and 2018. So things are looking really promising for our community in terms of voting turnout, and we don't want to let COVID-19 get in the way, because 2020 is a super important election year. And so the takeaway here is that we are moving to the polls at an upwards trend, and we want to keep this momentum going. So whoever you are and wherever you are, make sure that you are asking your family members, asking your friends, asking your community and peers if they're registered to vote, if they're ready to vote, and guide them through and guide them to resources if not. So thank you so much for letting me have my whole spiel, and I will turn it over to Christine, our moderator for the panel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Chen, Executive Director for Asia and Pacific Islander American Vote. Thank you, Julie, for laying out the groundwork. I'm really excited to be joined with a panel of API elected officials and candidates. What we've seen in the past was that when we have more Asian American Pacific Islanders running for office, that also increases the interest and engagement and registration and turnout for Asian American and Pacific Islander voters. So there is a huge correlation, but also by focusing this conversation with local API elected officials and candidates, they're on the ground dealing with what needs to happen in response to COVID-19 and all the other issues that we've been facing during this 2020 time period. So to kick it off, I'm going to go ahead and allow each of our panelists to actually do a self-introduction, because they have some amazing stories that goes beyond what you will read on a website. So first of all is candidate for Pennsylvania Auditor General, Nina Ahmad, and then followed after her will be State Representative Minnesota of Jay Xiong, and then State Senator for Ohio, Tina Maharath. So Nina, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Christine. First of all, I must say thank you to all who have coordinated this, Vote 2020, APIAVote, who's been around doing this work for so long. And a special thanks to Christine, who has been at this for such a long time. And I think she's probably looking at the fruits of her labor. I just had to take that point of privilege because I've known Christine for a long time. So kudos to you, Christine, for hanging with us and getting us to this place. We see two people who are already elected on this panel with us, and that is really correlated to the work that's been done on the ground for many years to get to this place. So I'm very grateful for that, and that's helping me. So I am a candidate, I'm the Democratic nominee for the state of Pennsylvania for the position of Auditor General, and I am a Bangladeshi American immigrant. So this is very new for Pennsylvania. I will be the first, I am currently, as a Democratic nominee, the first person of color to be nominated for a statewide executive office in the history of Pennsylvania. First Asian American, first Muslim woman, first a scientist, first feminist advocate for women. So it is about breaking barriers. It's not about me. It is about saying, let's open this door and keep it propped open wide so people can come in through behind us. As Christine said, something very important. We see voter turnout go up when you can identify with the candidate. And that's, you can identify with many identities that we bring to the table. But that's why it's critical that we bring these lived experiences, not only to turn out the vote, but actually to govern and to have rules and regulations and laws that reflect the lived experience of the communities that we represent. So I'll stop here. That I don't know how much more Christine wants me to say, but I lived through a war of independence that created the country of Bangladesh. And that forever has imprinted me to say that people will die for freedom. I have lived through that. I stand in the sacrifice of those folks. I also stand in the sacrifice of people here in this country who fought, particularly our African-American brothers and sisters who are still fighting today, as are we, to make sure that we have full citizenship in this country. We are treated like first-class citizens, and we have to keep fighting for that. So I'll stop here.
Great, thank you. Representative Xiong.
Thank you, Christine. Welcome everyone to our event this evening. My name is Xiong. I serve in the Minnesota State House. I was elected in 2018, proudly serving the city of St. Paul, the capital city in Minnesota. And I'm up for re-election again this year. I'm excited to be here to have this conversation, to share with you my experience and hear from all of you.
And Senator Maharath.
Hi, everybody. And again, I want to mimic Nina with thanking APIAVote and all of our partners today for hosting this, especially for Los Angeles, who are getting us some exposure within the Southeast Asian community. So I'm State Senator Tina Maharath. I'm in Ohio's 3rd Senate District, which encompasses primarily the suburbs of Columbus, which is our state capital. I'm the child of refugees, and I'm Ohio's first Asian American woman elected to a General Assembly.
So awesome. So Nina, because I know we have limited time with you, I want to go ahead and kick off the conversation with you. You have an incredible background in your work in and for the Asian American Pacific Islander community, as well as the broader communities of color. And during the Obama years, you also served as a commissioner for the White House Initiative on Asian American Pacific Islanders. So how has your experience as an Asian American woman impacted your life in pursuing a public service? And what has your experience been like as the first woman of color to serve as, or to run for the statewide executive in the Commonwealth? Like, is there one word also that explains what drives you?
Well, what drives me is to have a fair and just country. Really, fairness drives me. And as an Asian American woman, what I think, and some of you might identify with this, is being underestimated. So I love that people have no sense of what I'm bringing to the table. They have preconceived notions what an Asian American woman is. And so they're like, woohoo, I didn't expect this. So that element of surprise is really important when you're campaigning. So particularly when you're campaigning in a big field with many candidates. And I think the other lived experience of having to fight to have your voice heard, you sort of don't let anybody walk over you. And that comes from years of having to stand up for yourself, making sure there's room for your voice to be heard. Because again, that a very inaccurate model minority myth operates all the time. And so you're preconceived to be good in math and science. And actually I am good in math and science, but that doesn't mean that that's the only thing I do, right? So breaking those barriers has been important. And when I served on the commission, I really understood that if you don't have representation, public policy does not see you. So that was very important that was a great experience for me going forward. You're muted.
So for those that really don't follow Pennsylvania's structure, can you explain exactly what is an Auditor General and why did you decide to run for that position?
So the Auditor General is the fiscal watchdog. It is going to be my job to make sure the tax dollars of Pennsylvanians are spent with integrity, with accountability and transparency. Those are the things I want to bring to the table, to see where is your money going, follow the money. But very importantly, I want to use the data in that office, that every audit we do, we collect information about specific issues. I want to use that data to see how equitably is our money distributed. So really have an impact on the budget, actually work with our legislators like those on this panel today to give them, be a resource for them to say when we're looking at, for an issue, for example, healthcare and looking at pricing of drugs. I want to be able to tell them how much you're spending, where the efficiencies could be made, and what is unfairness in how these policies are going across 67 counties. So it's really a watchdog with an ability to have a megaphone across our 67 counties and the ability to work with legislature and the remaining part of our executive branch to have a strategic view and a position to drive public policy. Or that's how I see it as a progressive platform.
So are there any particular issues that you've always been passionate about throughout your career, that and how is that being tied to the position that you're running?
So one of the, as I said, I lived through that war. In 9 months, 3 million people were killed and 200,000 women and girls were brutalized. So that has made me an advocate for women and marginalized communities from a young age. And so when I bring that forward is how do we level the playing field, particularly in the workplace for women and other marginalized groups. And so that's been a passion of mine. I serve on the National Organization for Women. I'm on the board now. I used to be a local president. And I looked at one issue, for example, sexual harassment. The state government has spent over $3 million in the last few years settling non-disclosure cases. So in Philadelphia, we changed that and I actually testified, and I worked with our Asian American councilperson, Helen Gim, to testify on this issue to stop that, so that if your tax dollars are being used, you need to know whose bad behavior are you paying off for, right? So that's a change that I would like to do. But more importantly, how does anybody have impunity to behave in this manner in a workplace? What is the training and what are the accountability measures in place? So that impacts women of all stripes. It doesn't matter what package you come in, So that's something that I want to bring forth because that creates efficiencies. We don't waste money on that. I could put it into education. We could put it into healthcare. So those are some of the things that I feel very strongly about.
And then, so seeing that you're on the campaign trail right now and, we're all dealing with the pandemic, what are you doing as a candidate to ensure that your voters do come out in some shape or form and feel comfortable to be able to cast their vote?
It's been very difficult. In the middle of my primary campaign, we transitioned into the COVID environment. So we went from doing meetings and get-togethers to nothing, using Zoom platforms, email, phone calls, but most importantly, staying in touch with people because people are feeling very isolated. And, as Mrs. Obama today talked about a low-level depression that she's experiencing, a lot of people are experiencing that because it's not only just staying at home, it's worrying if I do something or someone comes, will I get ill? Will I get the access to hospital care? Are there going to be enough ventilators? It's all kinds of issues. So I think having someone talk to you, call you, connect with you is important, and then share with you how can my role as Auditor General impact their lives. So it's really communication. It has been very difficult because now with early voting, mail-in voting, I have to reach voters earlier than a normal standard election. So that means putting campaign dollars into spaces like TV and direct mail. It's just prohibitively expensive. I am totally someone who believes in publicly financed elections, which we of course don't have. So fundraising has been the most difficult part of all of it, I would say.
And then, many people struggle with starting the conversation about registering and voting with their family and friends. So do you have like a pitch or a strategy that you always use, especially for younger organizers who may be facing issues of ageism and gender dynamics within their own family?
I found, because I'm trying to talk to people from every background, every demographic group, right? Talking to white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, doesn't matter who they are and different ages. I try to ask people what they and I might have something in common. So I'm an immigrant. So if most of the AAPI communities either are second generation or immigrants themselves. So that conversation really is a quick conversation. It's a quick way to break the ice. That helps a lot because I can share some little thing that both of us have in common. Voting happens on emotions and not logic. That's the one thing I'm very clear about. So that emotional connection and establishing that is critical. So for a young organizer, I would say, try to have as much information about whom you're going to call. That's the research part of me. I try, it takes me a while, but I try to know something about who I'm calling, even if it's just where they live, and find something in their neighborhood that has happened. And that allows you to set an instant connection, and then people let their guard down and they talk to you and they hear you. So making it very personal and sharing your story. I have found every video that I've put out, they're short little clips. Anytime I have any of my children in it, most hits. And so if you don't have children, get your dog, or get your cat or somebody, because people like to see who you are outside of being this candidate running for office. What values are you bringing to the table? So I talk about my parents, talk about the role people have had in my life for the values that I have today. It's really a values conversation. It is really sharing, what will I do? My hashtag is leave no one behind. And I make sure people understand, what does that mean? My thing is, government is supposed to do public good. And when you marry it to leave no one behind, it is a government that sees and serves everyone. So that's my pitch.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nina. And I do know that you have to leave us, but thank you for those inspiring words. And we look forward to seeing you after Election Day.
Thanks again to everyone. Thank you to my panelists. I apologize, I can't get to hear you, but hopefully there'll be a recording and I'm going to go back at night cuddling my dog and listening to what pearls of wisdoms you folks had to give. But I would love to connect with all of you. And I think we should have an amazing reunion after this COVID pandemic is over and we have the best, biggest party in the world where we can connect and celebrate all the work everybody has done. So thanks everyone, and I'll see you soon. Vote, don't let COVID steal your vote.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So Ohio State Senator Tina Maharath, as being one of the first that we were just talking about, can you talk a little bit about your history in Ohio, growing up in Ohio, and how has your groundbreaking position as the first Asian American woman to serve in the Ohio Senate affected your work and your viewpoint? And how has your past experience prepared you for this position?
Yes, so here in Ohio, I'm actually from the suburbs. So I'm from Whitehall, Ohio, which is the suburbs of Columbus. It's just simply where our family got placed at after the refugee camp. So my family came here in 1990 and I was born months later in November of 1990. So although I'm not a refugee myself, I was essentially raised that refugee lifestyle, growing up in poverty. I had my two brothers and my little sister, my parents living in this small, tiny little ranch home over in Whitehall, Ohio. We had 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, and we all went through the public education system. So growing up, I watched the disparities of my mom going through the gender pay gap, both of my parents going through some discrimination at work, and also watching both of my parents go through that cultural, just a lot of cultural differences and language barriers. And I just had a lot of disparities growing up. So it affected me growing up because not only did I want to be just like an American, but after I turned 14, I was moved over to France, and my mom actually got in a tragic car accident, took the lives with my mom and brother. So the only ones who survived the car accident were my dad and my little sister. So in addition of growing up as a child of refugees, I then grew up as a child of trauma. So I wasn't really set up to succeed at all. In Ohio, we didn't have much resources for refugees, in addition to not much resources for those who had to go through trauma. So because of that trauma I had growing up, I had a really tough teenage years, young adulthood years, and then finally, I just decided this is enough. Why don't we have resources available for this type of things? These type of things happen all the time. These tragic freak accidents, or kids growing up in poverty, or kids having to go through some sort of disparity, such as their parents were drug addicts, etc. Because over in Ohio, we have a big opioid epidemic right now. And it seems like we're always on the table screaming for help, but nothing was getting done. So in college, I decided to change my major from business to politics, and that's where I landed here. I started off over at Ohio House interning first. U.S. Senate interning first, then moved over to Ohio House, and ironically, that's where I met Christine. I was the Ohio Field Fellow during the 2016 election cycle for APIAVote. These were all experiences I got to see in the field on hand, what type of people we represent here in Ohio, what kind of problems we have, and how do we get people more civically engaged. So I went ahead and did all those internships, and after my fellowship ended with APIAVote, I decided that it was seriously my time to run. I needed to run for office because of the fact that we didn't really have proper representation over in a General Assembly. Historically, for the 3rd state Senate seat, it's always been a male. It's always been a Caucasian male. And for me, it was always a Republican Party, and I represent Democratic views. But either way, they weren't properly representing mothers, which I'm a single mother. So they weren't properly representing mothers. They weren't properly representing people of color, and they weren't properly representing refugees and immigrants. So basically our voices were being disenfranchised because there was just so many things going on at the time in the 2016 cycle. So now, as Ohio's first Asian American woman, I had to go through a really ugly campaign, which I don't regret going through, because now it shows the disparities that how us people of color go through when we run for office. But now that I'm in office, I got to introduce legislations that not only impact us Asian Americans, but us people of color, us mothers, us women in general. And I've already made a historic freshman year, introducing 33 bills. 5 of them came out of the Senate. And, our General Assembly, I still have until the end of December to get more things done. But because of my little tiny voice, being the minority of the minority in Ohio, I now get to have a bigger voice for our General Assembly. And now it really does trigger people and inspire people to not only run for office, but also get out there and go vote and participate in civic engagement activities such as your census.
You did mention a little bit, about your background and about trauma, because right now, 2020, a lot of people are experiencing trauma. So do you have any advice on those who are going through this, especially at a young age as you did, how to overcome it and what they can do?
My best advice is to accept it. It is okay not to be okay. Growing up as a child of refugees, you often look up to your elders and just think that they're the strongest people in the world and you have to be just like them. So that is what deteriorated me from sitting there accepting the fact that I went through trauma and the life that I had was tough. So when I got older and accepted the fact that it's okay to not be okay, that's when everything finally looked better again. Like it just looked like I was starting to see the end of the rainbow. Because for so long I just felt like I'm not like my parents. You know, my parents went through hell and back, running across so many fields and crossing so many rivers. I kept trying to tell myself, toughen it up. Like they crossed through these rivers just to make it to make it America, for you to have a great life, all for you to fail like this. But my definition of failure is going to be completely different from my parents' definition of failure. And that was just something I just needed to accept.
Wonderful. Let me go ahead and turn it over to Minnesota State Representative Xiong. You were elected in 2018, and with it, it was a momentous time for the Hmong community with a number of Hmong elected officials. So can you tell us a little bit about that moment, how that came about? Because I know because of that moment, it allowed you to serve as the founder of the Minnesota Asian Pacific Caucus. So what successes and challenges does a newly established caucus face with that?
Thank you, Christine. I was elected in 2018. Funny story was Representative Samantha Vang, who currently serves with me, she was my campaign manager. And so that year, the sitting representative from Representative Vang's district had decided to last minute run for Attorney General, in which her seat vacated. And so I approached Representative Vang and said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you served in the legislature with me? She didn't want to run for public office, so let me tell you that. And I started telling her, well, you should think about it because I don't want to be up there by myself with just Lee, Representative Lee, and Representative her and Senator her. It would be great to have you in. And I think she did some deciding and she decided to run. And that year, also another brother, Representative Xiong, also ran where I never would have imagined after a decade where we were former Senator Mimo and former state representative, our first two API electeds to the state legislature here in Minnesota retired, that we will have a decade later 6 sitting state lawmakers of Hmong descent amongst about 20, I'm probably off here, about 20 elected API officials here in the state of Minnesota. And so it's been an amazing time here at the legislature, serving with 6 legislators of API descent who happen to be Hmong. And as I stated a decade ago, the only 2 statewide elected Hmong officials in Minnesota who were also pioneers in that respect in the country were retiring from public life in their offices. And we knew that if we did not step up, someone else may represent us who may not reflect our values and experience as immigrant refugee communities. And we needed to keep the energy of our community going so we don't lose the momentum. And I want to say that our parents took us this far, fleeing war, famine, and persecution, and we have to keep the dreams of getting full political representation alive. And we have to lay down roots and stakes and take on a new civic duty here as America has become our new home. And so we had to create an institution whose purpose was to stay rooted in our community strengths and values. And that's where we also, that's how we came up with the Minnesota Asian Pacific Caucus, somewhat modeled after California's, but I don't want to let them know that.
Love that. So, you know, because I do know that that you yourself has been an organizer, because I worked with you in that capacity before you ran for office, as well as Representative Vang. So in that frame, what would you tell immigrant voters who are limited English proficient about what are the steps that they could take to make sure that they could go vote, especially when they already have some of those challenges?
Well, certainly there are many organizations on the ground who are doing the work. One of the organizations that I co-founded and APIAVote has worked with is the Asian American Organizing Project, and there are several other local organizations such as CAPI USA, and including our government agencies who are out there working with many different groups to ensure that voting is accessible. And so here in the state of Minnesota, where we have some of the highest voter turnouts in the country, we also have many great laws that help to engage folks to vote, right? And so, for example, here in the state of Minnesota, we have no excuse voting early, where you can send in requests for a ballot to vote and mail it in. So right now, I believe the count is we are over 1,000% increase compared to the last election cycle here in the state of Minnesota, which is amazing. But some of the challenges that comes with that, as I was just having the conversation with the Secretary of State's voter director last week, is that how are we ensuring that the communities where there are language access, who may not have internet access, who may not have access to resources, can know about these opportunities where they can do a request, who can assist them and help them to vote early. And so these are some of the issues that we've been working on the ground here at the state level. And I know that there are many nonprofit organizations who are also doing the same kind of work out there.
So, turning back to Ohio, my home state, there was a lot of confusion, especially during the primaries, about are they going to mail ballots to us? Do we need to apply? So nowadays, Tina, how do you explain that to a voter? Like, if there's all this confusion, like, what's the simplest way if you're new to this, if you're a first-time voter, how do you go through all the clutter and figure out, what's the best way to go vote?
Yes, which is a great question, because there's still confusion, unfortunately. So unfortunately, our Secretary of State sent out notification saying we're going to prepay for postage, but you have to get that approved at the General Assembly, and we didn't get that approved, and we don't have CARES Act funding. So I don't want to play the blame game, but most of these times, most of the issues going on has to do with the Secretary of State, unfortunately. So fortunate enough for me, a person who does have English as a first language, I can easily explain to them in my alternative languages and let them know that this is what's going on. I apologize, but unfortunately for right now, we have this little juggle of, first we gotta ask for a application just to request for an absentee ballot. Then we gotta send that back, and then we get a ballot. So we're trying to get that cleared up. And then fortunate enough for me, I am in a General Assembly now. So that way we can have a different perspective on it, a perspective for an immigrant and refugee, because not most people understand the hassle it has to go through for someone who doesn't have English as a first language, especially someone who doesn't have an an Asian language as a second language, because most of our languages here in Ohio is primarily Spanish and Somali. So it's a tough ride, Christine. Home is looking ugly right now when it comes to voting.
So this is actually tossed out to both of you, and just so you guys could free flow into this conversation. So let's go through some of the basics. Like, how does one even confirm that you are registered, and also if there's a way to track your application or your ballot?
If you live in Minnesota, you can go to mnvotes.org, where it tracks if you're registered, it tracks if your ballot has been received or if it has been sent. And if there are any errors with your address or anything like that, it's mnvotes.org.
Then Ohio, is that the same system or is that different?
No, not at all. But in Ohio, the good thing about Ohio is we do have good county resources available. So I can speak specifically on the county since I've personally gone through the system. If you go to franklincountyboe.gov and you log in, which is simple information that they'll request. If you have a login information, you can indeed track your ballot real time. Unfortunately, at the state level, both state and county level, you can indeed check to see if you're confirmed. But the best bet is to always call your county board of elections, because that's a fortunate thing for us in the state of Ohio is we have a good checks and balance system. So calling your county board of elections will be your best bet to get your first step started, which is to get registered to vote or to confirm your registration.
So as you could tell from these two answers, as well as from earlier when Nina was talking about this, is that, you know, it is very complicated. It's actually very much state by state that you have to follow. But I know that APIAVote will be working with the 2020 project, as well as all of our partners across the country, where APIAVote works in a broader voting rights coalition. So anytime there are changes on the state level, we plan on updating our websites and making sure that our partners also do the same. And we plan on trying to create in-language graphics and materials to really try to explain the 101 in regards to your options for early vote, as well as absentee voting. So this actually is very confusing. There's a lot of discussion about mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, is it fraudulent or not? I mean, how do you decipher through the clutter? What is true, and how would you explain that?
Well, over in Ohio, we too have great nonprofit organizations who do fight for these type of things. Luckily for us, we do partner with APIAVote, and we partner with a lot of our Asian organizations. So the primarily big umbrella in the state of Ohio is Asia Inc. So they do have resources available for you to get through this clutter. But the problem is the clutter getting started, period. So fortunately enough for us, we also have ACLU too, who fights for our justice to make sure our votes do not get disenfranchised. So that's why I always heavily depend on the local levels, because the local levels have their own home rule versus going to a state level. Right now, it is just a mess in the state of Ohio. But this is more reasons why we need you to get out there and go vote. So that way we can vote for people such as their Secretary of State who properly represent us or get this process made more easier made for us versus going through a bunch of clutter and trying to find these steps and directions. Because in the state of Ohio, they tell us one thing, such as go to our website, voteohio.gov, and next thing you know, the website magically crashes.
Before I move on to the next question, I do want to remind everyone that if you have specific questions, please put it into the Q&A or the chat room, and we will go ahead and take a look at those and bring that up as well. So for Jay, we in the Hmong community, I know you have organized quite a bit with the elders who are limited English proficient, and in the past there's been some voter suppression issues in terms of, can you talk a little bit of what has transpired in Minnesota in terms of how many people can actually assist with those who are limited English proficient, and what is voter suppression? In what ways does that come about, and how do we prevent that from happening?
Yes, thanks, Christine. And like I noted earlier, yes, Minnesota, we are one of the highest voter turnout states in the country. However, we have some laws that are backwards, such as we are only one of 2 states in the country where there is a limit on voter assistance, and that limit is 3. Currently, right now, because we are the only divided state legislature in the country, we can't get anything done with election laws. Representative Samantha Vang has been a champion of overturning the state limit on voter assistance. And I know that there was a story 2-3 years ago about one of our council members of Hmong descent assisting a voter at the election polls, where it was state law says that he couldn't do, but federal law says, hey, if a voter chooses to have anyone to assist them, they have every right. Where it went to court, and our council member won. And so here we are in 2020. It's my understanding that there was or is currently a lawsuit going on here in the state of Minnesota to allow more than 3, an assistant to help more than 3 voters. In the past, where I've done work in both partisan and nonpartisan campaigns, we've had limited English speakers going to the polls where our volunteers would be told you can't assist more than 3 people. But then the 4th person, there's no one else to assist them. And sometimes these polling locations may not have bilingual election judges. And so what we have been doing, what APIAVote has been doing with the partners here locally is working with our county and state election officers to ensure that there are bilingual election judges. I know that in the city of Minneapolis in 2016, I know I was working in the elections office that we recruited bilingual election judges, and precincts where we knew there would be a high turnout of multilingual voters, and ensure that bilingual judges were also paid more because they had extra skills that they need to be well compensated for. And so currently right now in the state of Minnesota, if you go to the Secretary of State's website, you can find over many languages. All of our information is in Hmong, Lao, Vietnamese, Somali, Oromo, Karen, Bhutanese. Same thing with many of the organizations who are doing the work on the ground. They also have folks who can assist on election day. Right now I'm currently working with a church organization in my district to help disseminate some voter guidelines in different languages. We have a primary a week from today, next Tuesday, where we're also trying to get out folks to go and vote. And so I would encourage those of you who are in areas where you may not have these organizations or resources to be in touch with the Christine Chen from APIAVote.
Thanks, Jay. One of the questions we have here is there's a national poll worker shortage due to the pandemic because most people were older folks. So less poll workers mean less poll openings, sites opening, especially poor and communities of color communities, and longer wait times at the sites. Wait times that only disadvantaged families and people of color cannot afford to wait to day of. What can we do to encourage youth to apply as poll workers?
That is a very great question. And, you know, over in Ohio, we're going through a little battle right now too with, actually, I'm sure the whole nation's going through that actually with trying to figure out things with school. So when it comes down to civic engagement, as a person who used to organize for these type of things at a very young age, we have to remember that we are our ancestors' greatest dreams. We're their widest dreams, and their widest dreams were something as simple as getting our rights, getting equal rights, getting just equal justice and all. So that's something I always inspire the youth to do, because we are fortunate enough to have been born and raised with rights. And that's something our parents didn't. And that's a message I try to always convey. Unfortunately, right now during the pandemic, we can't do things traditionally as we would like to do, but fortunate enough for us, because everything's trying to be virtual, we have the opportunity to do things more outside of a realm that we're used to. So with these younger folks who have to do everything virtual because of the pandemic, this is an opportunity for you to step outside of your realm, step outside of your comfort zone, and go ahead and participate in making a difference over in our local county board of elections and try to be a poll worker. It's probably going to be a more, I want to say socializable experience, if that's what you're looking for this pandemic. But either way, these kids, they need to see what is really going on the grounds outside of the pandemic.
Our next question is, Trump is sowing the doubt about the safety of voting during COVID, even suggesting we should push back the election date. How concerned should we be about this? Easy question. Any of you?
We should be concerned.
I'm like, Jay.
The fact that we have a president who is not only racist and sexist, who's trying to change our election system. Your right to vote. This is about your right to vote. This is why we have so many laws in place where you can vote early. You can vote by mail. If you are in a military base, by law, you can vote, request an absentee ballot. And so I would encourage all of you to turn out to vote this fall, either by voting early, requesting a ballot online, and if you are here in Minnesota, there are some polling places where you can go in early to vote as we speak. And so I encourage those of you who are here in the state to go out and vote next Tuesday and this November. And we need an administration that is going. I'm sorry, I'm getting very partisan here. I know this is a nonpartisan conversation, but this is a reality: is that we have a sitting president who does not care about your right to vote, who wants to get rid of our rights to vote, who is starting all of these issues with not just our voting rights, but policies, failure to address the pandemic. This is why we are here today. So get out there and vote and do your part.
Yeah, and to add on to that, you can hear from Jay and I's conversations right now that this is complete 360 of what's going on in Ohio versus Minnesota. And these are actually more reasons why you do need to go vote. If you want these of a proper representation, if you want like a proper public policies out there put in place for you, we need you to get out there and vote and elect the right people. I'm sitting here listening to Jay and just nodding my head like, oh, that sounds like a dream for me in Ohio, but I don't have that. I have a Secretary of State who constantly tries to disenfranchise our vote for several reasons, but our primary election happened already. And guess what happened our primary election? The day before our election, they actually required all the polling places to shut down, and it created a mess. It was something that should have been pre-planned ahead of time. And we should be concerned now because November's coming up and we don't have a set stone plan out there. How are we going to make a plan? Is by you getting out there to go vote, or you go and call your members of the General Assembly or the Secretary of State and let them know that you are very concerned and this is your right to vote and you want to exercise it. So this is how important it is. I don't live in magical fairy tale land in the Hmong village over in St. Paul with Jay. I live in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm the first and only Asian American in General Assembly right now.
Yes, if we had a better federal guidance and a stronger, more committed national leadership, we wouldn't have a patch of work, state by state versions of these election issues. And so get out there and vote. We can't afford whatever years or months of this presidency again.
So also, that's actually related to this, is like, how concerned should we be about the post office ability to handle the mail-in ballots? Like, how are your states dealing with that?
In Minnesota, thank goodness, we have a Democrat Secretary of State who has also served here in the State House while I was a staffer at the State House, who has a robust system and remember I told you, our absentee ballot has increased over 1,000% since the last election. We're doing everything we can to ensure that people have the right to exercise their right to vote, to get engaged, to be involved. And that's why we're having these conversations with nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations on the ground, with elected officials, with community leaders in these certain pockets of populations where they need to be more accessible. So we're doing everything we can here in the state of Minnesota to make voting accessible, even though we are the #1 state in the country for voter turnout.
And I'm actually the exact opposite in Ohio. So we should be very concerned about how we're going to be able, or the USPS be able to do their jobs, because if they don't have the federal funding, we don't have it over in the state level either. So actually what the Secretary of State's doing is trying to delay their rights to vote by closing a lot of polling locations, not providing people notifications, and not providing people with alternative options. Luckily, like I said, the local levels, they're really good about keeping the voters updated, trying to provide those voters their right to vote, and there are different options available. So we do have polling locations who have like these ballot boxes available where you can just simply drop off your ballots. But for those who don't have that option, and if the USPS is going through issues, we should be very concerned. So that's why I want to mimic what Jay said. Like, if we had better federal guidance, it would help a lot. But right now we're heavily dependent on local levels to try to make sure we get everybody's rights to vote.
And I want to go ahead and also clarify that for one to change the date of the election, that's actually the decision of Congress. So we don't see that changing because of the balance of power in Congress. And then also in regards to the US Postal Service, this is why we're really encouraging everyone that in a large majority of states, applications for absentee ballots have already opened up. So it's just unclear if you wait too long, like whether or not you're going to get your ballot in time. So we're really encouraging everyone to apply now, especially if it's available. So that way you can have your ballot. Now, if you end up that you delay and you're not sure that you can mail it in time, many of those jurisdictions are allowing you to at least drop it off. But at least you have that option and you actually did receive your ballot. So just wanted to also point that out as well. Also, if you are voting in person and arrive at the polls and feel uncomfortable about the safety protocols, long lines, no social distancing, masks, what options does a voter have?
So you can also report them in Ohio, at least. So you can also report them to the local health department and the state health department, because it is a statewide orders that we have here in the state of Ohio to have those practices such as social distancing and wearing masks out in public currently.
Great. So then also, since we are nearing the end, I also wanted to ask you the same question that I asked of Nina, that, like I said, many people are struggling to really start the conversation with registering and voting. We know that over 11 million Asian American Pacific Islanders are 18 years and older and are US citizens, but less than half of that population typically register and go vote. So how can we change that? What is your pitch that others can emulate and use as well?
Well, my pitch in the state of Ohio is we've just went through a decade of scandals. So the last two speakers of our Ohio House have been charged with FBI investigations. They're all still pending, etc. But is that who you really want to represent you? No. So you need to get out there and go vote. I understand that there's frustration around how the electoral college vote works for the presidency level, but what about the local levels? Your vote are voting people out, are voting people in, like myself, into office. In 2018, we just elected me as Ohio's first Asian American woman in the General Assembly, but we can't just stop at 2018. We got to keep going. We got to have our General Assembly reflect what our state really looks like. And that's why we really need to start the conversation of how important voting is and why you need to go out there and get your votes in. Because for as long as you keep staying at home and looking at that application to turn in your absentee ballot, we're going to get more speakers of the House who's going to bribe people of $60 million to get laws that don't really impact your state.
Jay?
Yes, there are a lot of issues at stake here. If you care about housing issues, if you care about our education system, if you care about immigration issues, if you care about our future, your children's future, then you have to be engaged. You have to participate, because everything we do revolves around politics. If you don't get involved, don't be whining when people tell you what to do. So that's how I got involved. I got tired of the same old status quo. I wanted to see some change. I didn't want to run for public office, but hey, I had to step up, right? Because no one was going to do it. No one's going to care about my issues. So my message to all of you out there is be involved. If you don't, you'll be on the menu.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ohio State Senator Tina Maharath and Minnesota State Representative Jay Xiong. Thank you everyone for joining us. We also want to leave a few homework assignments for all of you out there. 3 things that you could do immediately, right? Right now, we're still in the middle of the census count for the 2020 census. And even though over half of the population has actually submitted their census forms, What we're seeing there are gaps, especially in larger cities, and that is where a large number of communities of color and Asian American Pacific Islanders are not being counted. So I'm asking all of you to have those conversations with your family and friends. It's most likely not people that you talk to all the time, but really think hard in terms of who is limited English proficient, who may not necessarily get the information and have had that discussion about the importance of census, and tie it back to the anxieties that they're having today, whether it's about COVID, health, jobs and economy, that's all tied to census. Secondly, it's all about voter registration. August and September, we're asking you to do what you can to register as many of your family and friends. As I said, do not assume that half of your family and friends are most likely not registered just by looking at the statistics. The 2020 project has provided you links right here so that you could use to go ahead and register your friends and family. And then lastly, incorporate this into your everyday discussion. It doesn't really have to be a heavy lift, but nowadays there's so much discussion about issues on hand, what people are concerned about. All these things can be tied back to voting. We're just relying on you to connect the dots for your family and friends. So with that, on behalf of APIAVote and the 2020 project, thank you for joining us tonight. And we look forward to working with you out in the field and ensuring that we increase voter registration and participation this fall and beyond. Thank you.